Hello, this is Michael Brick, and here is my presentation on the blues. All right, there we go. So I have chosen the blues as my music genre to do a presentation on. For one, because I have a deep love for the music, and also I love and appreciate its deep significance within the African American culture. And its significance goes all the way back to the origin of African Americans within the Americas. Its origins are within African folk music and the spirituals and work calls of the African American slaves and workers throughout the 16th clear through to the mid to late 19th century. And in the late 19th century, the blues started to evolve out of a want for a new sound. And that sound has a very, very distinct sound, and that is known as the blue notes. Now, blue notes are separate from a standard musical scale, and they actually exist in between chords. And they have a very, very distinct sound, a very unique sound. Also, the blues gets its name from the original tone of the lyrics and the music, which were very blue emotionally and down, and they're about the struggle of life and slavery and oppression and racism. But as blues evolved over the years, it started, to not only be about that oppression and that struggle, but about perseverance and empowerment and rising up. And like I said, the blues began with African American slaves, and it really originated in what's known as the Delta region, which is the Mississippi and Yazoo River deltas in Louisiana and Mississippi. And the blues is very, very regional, but it started there in that Mississippi Delta and slowly started to spread out. But what really spurred its spread were the Jim Crow laws of the early 1900s. And that caused blues to move out and develop what has been known as the country blues and the Memphis blues and the St. Louis blues. And the country blues, were Georgia, Florida, Texas, the Carolinas, and it's still very much in the South. And even Memphis, still being in the South, it had a very, very distinct sounds. The same with St. Louis, and then later moved on to Chicago and Detroit, which they have very, very distinct sounds, which we'll cover later on. But a few notable figures of the blues are Ma Rainey, who is known as the mother of the blues, and W.C. Handy, who is known as the father of the blues. And both of these artists actually came out of the Memphis blues. Ma Rainey, her blues is very much influenced in vaudeville and just kind of that ragtime feel of that early 1900s, 1920s. And W.C. Handy actually created what is known as kind of the blues formats within the lyrics, which is an AAB format. And that is two verses that are similar and then one that is distinctly different as far as its rhythm and beat. And it makes a syncopated beat and rhythm. And W.C. Handy was, although many blues artists were exploited, he was one of the first to be exploited. He wrote blues music for white artists. And in his notes, he would write ragtime, which was meant the, or not ragtime, foxtrot. Sorry about that. He would write foxtrot, which was the dance that was meant to be danced to the music. Now, the white artist sped up the meter of the songs, which made it more of a ragtime sounds, which then influenced jazz, which was born out of that. It was born out of the work of W.C. Handy and the overall Memphis blues. And then we have Huddie Ledbetter. Sorry, it's a little bit of a tongue twister. And he is one of the most notable singers of the country blues. And he too was exploited. His music was completely, just plain ripped off by many artists without giving him any credit. All the way from the 80s band Ram Jam with their song Black Betty, which is one of the old African American work calls that Leadbelly had sung and recorded. And then also Nirvana sings one of his songs just completely. They don't even change any of the lyrics, and they gave him no credit at all. Now, that's not to say there aren't other bands who don't give him credit. Like Pearl Jam, they have a song dedicated to Leadbelly that's named Ledbetter, that they tributed to him without exploiting any of his lyrics or sounds, and yet they still wanted to make a tribute to him. Let's see. And then also we have on here Mary Johnson, who is also one of the very famous St. Louis blues singers. And out of the St. Louis blues, there was the influence for soul, and the music, the St. Louis blues really tied back to those old spirituals. Also out of the St. Louis blues, there was the Ma Thornton, who was another exploited artist, most famously exploited by Elvis, who took her songs and completely changed them and yet still used the same lyrics, like Blue Suede Shoes and Hound Dog, most famously. And then over time, after World War II, as music started becoming electrified, even though Chicago blues and Detroit blues already had a very, very distinct sound, as they became electrified, they were known as a broader urban blues. And two very, very famous artists within this were B.B. King and Muddy Waters. So B.B. King here on the left and Muddy Waters here on the right. Now, Muddy Waters really personified the Chicago blues sounds, and it's that bum 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 bum. It's very, very distinct. And B.B. King, within that urban blues, he is later became known as the king of the blues, and he really fostered in the rhythm in blues, which was a more mainstream blues, but that still harkens back to that original spirit of the blues, singing about the struggle and yet the perseverance, And two that became very well known within rhythm and blues are Etta James here on the left and Nina Simone here on the right. And Nina Simone really used the blues to sing about empowerment and perseverance in the civil rights movements of the mid um, 20th century in the 1960s, even the 1970s. And all of these artists have empowered modern blues artists like Brittany Howard, who is the lead singer of Alabama Shakes, here on the left, and Ruthie Foster. And all of them throughout all of the different iterations of the blues, and as it evolves, it still harkens back to those original spirituals and work calls, especially here with Brittany Howard, who she says her influences are soul. She never really mentions the blues, and yet the soul music in her sounds and her lyrics, it harkens back to that original blues and the Delta blues. See, and even Ruthie Foster also ties back to that vein of Nina Simone and the civil rights and the singing, of that perseverance and the rising up and the empowerment. And it continues to tie back to those deep, deep roots and that deep history within the Americas for the African American people. And like I said, that it's also for all who are downtrodden, that it has evolved into anyone who is oppressed, that there's this commonality, this common bonds, that emotion that is within the music that still carries on throughout the centuries, that still keeps that significance, even though, yes, it has been exploited throughout the years and appropriated. And yet these new young artists seek to get back to those original roots and even bring forth those original artists, as as they speak about their influences and such, to give them credit and the notability that they so deserve. And yeah, and for the 5 songs that I have picked for the blues, I mean, this was probably the hardest part for all of this, but I have chosen songs from Ma Rainey, Huddie Ledbetter, Muddy Waters, Etta James, and Brittany Howard with the Alabama Shakes. And even though I know there's so much more blues out there, I thought these 5 were a perfect kind of snapshot of blues over the history of the blues. So yeah, and I have those videos following this little presentation here. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for listening.